Hello, this is Andrine, Jewish American Priestess. We're here today. We're going to do a reading. We're going to do a Hebrew reading, but we're going to start out with justice cards today. And I'm choosing justice today because we're right at the weekend for Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which I think of as Social Justice Day. This weekend is a weekend where we celebrate that by coming together, celebrating by working toward justice, for racial justice, for justice of all sorts in the world. So that's the theme of our reading today. And where in the world do you need to seek justice, and where will justice find you? So we're going to start today. I've got 4 tarot cards out here. I've got the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith up above, just to remind us what our theme is. And then I've got these 3 cards, which are the cards that we're going to choose from. We're going to do 3 different readings. This card is the Justice card from the Queers and Queens deck by Sam Kahn. And that is what justice looks like. This second card is the Justice card from the Portland Tarot by Theresa Pridemore. And this third card is the Golden Botticelli deck. So take a moment to sit with and determine which of these 3 cards is calling to you today as the most resonant for your reading into justice today. I'll place this timestamp down below, and you choose which card calls to you, and I'll see you in your reading. All right, card number 1. This is the card from the Queers and Queens LGBT Tarot deck. And this is what your card looks like. We've got some chrysanthemums and I believe chestnut flowers surrounding the justice here in this card. And we're going to set justice off to the side here. And we're going to take out some Hebrunes today from the upcycled tile and gold deck today. Not a deck exactly, I guess. Set. We're going to call them a set. I'm going to start by laying down 3 Hebrunes. We've got the letter Gimel. We've got the letter Kuf. And we have the letter Chet. And the way I'm going to read this today is the top letter is what our general situation is about here. So the letter Gimel, it is traditionally a foot or a camel. It is the number 3 in Gematria. It's about walking forward movement. Some say it is about running toward justice, which is wonderful for this reading. It is the letter that corresponds to harmony. So justice and harmony, because the number 3 is a harmonic letter. It has those 3 sides of a triangle, which makes stability. It also corresponds to the 3 creation elements of air, water, and fire. It is the binary foundation of peace and evil, which is to say wholeness and wickedness. So in the Garden of Eden, back in Torah, at the very beginning, there was a tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the first humans chose to eat from that tree against the directive of the divine. Because humans, we just got to know. We need to know. They say, fool around and find out. But they say that like it's a bad thing. And I just need to know all the things. So it is this binary foundation of peace and evil. But, you know, knowing the difference between those two things, I think is pretty essential in the life in order to discern justice. Justice is about being able to look at all sides of a situation and then determine what is the correct path forward. Justice in Hebrew is the word tzedek, and it's also the name of the planet Jupiter, tzedek. And Gimel rules over that planet. It is the letter that corresponds to the planet Jupiter in the sky. So we're starting off with our situation being all about justice, about running toward justice, about the planet Tzedek, which is Jupiter, and Jupiter is this giant planet that, you know, makes things enlarge, and ideally justice enlarging. I think of Gimel as corresponding with the traditional tarot card of the Chariot, because it's about forward movement. And in the runes, in the Nordic runes, it would correspond to the rune Raido, which is journey or ride or progression, going the right way, going toward justice. Again, it's all about going toward justice. So that's beautiful that is the first letter. And the second letter in our reading is, what is the challenge? And we have the challenge showing up as Kuf. And Kuf is a very interesting letter. It also has this interesting binary situation where it is about holiness. It's the first letter of the word kadosh, which means holiness, or kodesh, which also means holiness. Holiness meaning that which is designated for service. Like anything can be holy, but it has to be designated for holiness. So it's got that theme to it, but it also is the first letter of the word klipa, which means shells or shards. And there's an ancient story where the divine needed to contract themselves in order to create space for the universe, and that divinity was placed inside of some vessels, and the vessels were not strong enough to hold the light of the divine, so those vessels shattered, and those shards flew out all across the universe, and the light of the divine spread into all beings in the universe. So we have both the divine light in all things, and we have these klipa, these shells, these shards that are somewhere in the universe, some say are causing pain or discomfort in the universe. So we have this binary concept of holiness, that which is designated for divinity, like the light in the vessels, but also klipa, the shells or the shards of those vessels. So that which is designated for service, and then also sort of this, the sharp product of destruction that's out there. It is the number 100 in Gematria, and 100 is interesting because it's 10 times 10, makes this perfection. So 1 times 10 is 10, and 1 is the letter Aleph, Aleph meaning oneness. 10 is the letter Yud, which is the first letter of the divine name, and 10 times 10 brings us to Kuf, holiness, this ultimate manifestation of sacredness. But again, like I said, it also has that other side of being the shells, the shards. The other word that stands out as starting with Kuf in terms of the Hebrews is the word Kof, which means monkey. You can see it kind of looks like a little tail down here at the end, corresponding to our animal nature. So although we aspire to have holiness in our world, in our lives, we are also attached to our animal nature, and that desire to just do what we want without thinking too much about the consequences or the actions. So we have this conflict, perhaps. This is the challenge that we're running into, is this conflict between the desire for holiness, the desire for running toward justice, and our animal nature. That light that has been expanded out into the universe, and those shells that cause a little bit of discomfort or pain in our lives. That is our challenge right now. And what we have is our outcome, or our consequence of the current situation, is the letter Chet. And Chet is the first letter of the word Chai, which means life. You've all probably heard the phrase L'chaim, means to life. And so it does correspond to life and the idea of life, but it also is the first letter of the word Choshek, which means darkness. So we have this, again, two-sided thing. Interesting, because justice is about weighing those scales. We have life on the one hand and we have darkness on the other. And they're not necessarily in conflict. We need both as we go through life, because we can't see light without darkness. We can't appreciate life without death. Chet is also the number 8 in Gematria, which is the infinity loop. It is that infinity symbol, because 7 is the number of days of creation, and 8 is one more than that. So if you have finished creation, you have one more day, that's the rest. That's eternity. So we have eternity as our outcome here. And there's a lot of affiliations with the number 8. There's the concept that the child who is born has a naming ceremony on the 8th day, and or a circumcision, which is a covenant. It's a covenant with the divine. The 8 also corresponds to the 8 days of Hanukkah, in the darkest season of the year, where we light up candles. That we just had that pass last month. And Hanukkah is about dedication. It's about consecration. The temple was defiled, and it took 7 days to consecrate the oil and the temple. And then on the 8th day, we celebrated with this dedication of light. Additionally, the Chet corresponds to the chuppah, the marriage canopy. You can see it kind of looks like a chuppah. In Jewish weddings, people get married under a chuppah, which is kind of a very flimsy structure with 4 legs and basically a cloth over the top. So it's about contracts and covenants, maybe contracts with yourself or with the divine or even with another person. So all of this running toward justice, being able to discern between what is holy and what is klipa, shells, or shards, will bring us to a place of life and darkness, contracts and covenants, and a connection with the infinite. So for those of you who chose this justice card from the Queers and Queens deck, this has been your justice reading. I hope you run toward justice and find what you need. Find yourself connecting with the infinite. Hello, folks who chose card number 2. This is your card, the Justice card from the Portland Tarot deck. You can see that it not traditional justice. She has knitting needles and scales. It looks like a scrub jay up on her shoulder as well. So, for those of you who chose this card, I'm going to set her off to the side over here so you can see her. We're going to take out 3 Hebrunes today and find out what is up for you in terms of justice. What justice are you pursuing? What justice is pursuing you? I'll take out 3 Hebrunes. The first one is the letter Resh. Number 2, we have the letter Tav. And for the third letter, we have the letter Nun. Okay, and the way we're going to read these today is the top letter is our current situation. The central letter is our challenge, and the final letter is our outcome. So the first letter in our reading is the letter Resh. And Resh is the first letter of the word Rosh. Rosh meaning head. And so it has to do with new beginnings, as in Rosh Hashanah, which is the new year, or Rosh Chodesh, which is the new month, or the word Breshit, which means in the beginning, the first word of the Torah. And Resh, so Resh has to do with beginnings. It is the binary foundation of seed and barrenness. So there's something about a seed being planted, some new beginning that's starting in your situation here. But Resh can also have to do with being poor, a poor one, bending the head, being humble. The word for poor one is Rosh. But I prefer to think of it as a seed, a new beginning. But there's some new beginning coming. It governs over the planet Mercury in space, so it can be about communication, maybe a new communication coming in. And it has it corresponds to the right ear in the body, so maybe listening intently for whatever communication is coming for you. And so some kind of new beginning is coming soon in terms of your justice reading. Something is beginning, and some movement toward justice. The second letter in our reading is the letter Tav, and that corresponds to the position of what is our challenge right now. What is our challenge or fear in our situation? And the letter Tav is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, so maybe there's some concern about an ending. This is about completions. It's a seal or a stamp or a signature. So it has this connection to endings. And since you've got a new beginning coming up, maybe the concern is that it's not going to last forever, that something's going to come to an end as well. And that's generally the case. When something begins, another thing ends, and eventually that thing ends and another thing begins. So, I wouldn't be too concerned about endings, but I understand that there is a concern, that there is a fear or a challenge around endings. Perhaps there's something that needs to end before you begin. And that's the challenge, is that you know that there's something that needs to come to an end before this new beginning. And so you need to take care of that situation, whatever it is. Tav is also the binary foundation of sovereignty and slavery. So we have to determine where we land on that continuum between sovereignty and slavery by having our own sovereignty in a situation and not becoming enslaved to it, whether it be a work or a relationship or just society. And where do we stand in terms of justice around sovereignty and slavery? Can we stand in our own sovereignty and not enslave others? Can we fight against slavery without becoming like the ones who are oppressive? In terms of justice, Tav seems to be saying, fight against slavery, fight for your own freedom, and fight for everyone's freedom. Don't become the sovereign then that rules over the others. And maybe there's a challenge with that. The letter Tav is said to look like a Dalet and a Nun together. Sort of looks like a Resh and a Nun together. In fact, you can see the Resh here and the Nun down below, and in how they It looks like the combination of those two things coming together here. But the letter Dalet and the letter Nun spell Din or Dan, which means judgment. So there's a certain amount of judgment that is having to do here. Not just justice, but judgment about where have you landed, perhaps, on that continuum between sovereignty and slavery. Have you enslaved others or yourself? Tav is the last letter in the word emet. Emet meaning truth. And those are the first, middle, and last letters of the alphabet. Aleph, Mem, Tav spells emet, beginning, middle, and end. So we need to seek truth and justice. Tav corresponds to the moon in space. It governs over the moon, the celestial body, the moon in space. So it has this aura of mystery about it. In my interpretation of the Hebrunes as how they correspond to the traditional tarot cards, the Tav corresponds to the moon card, which is about the unconscious, the intuition, and the shadow self. So our challenge here with Tav is, where are we in terms of our relationship to personal sovereignty and slavery? Personal slavery, societal sovereignty, and societal slavery. And what are we doing to work toward justice? Are we doing things unconsciously? Or are we listening to our intuition? Are we facing our shadow self in order to come out in such a way that we can bring about an ending to what needs to be ended and begin the new thing? And that brings us to our final letter, the letter Nun. And this is the outcome, given the current circumstances, to our situation. And the letter Nun is about humility. It's about being humble and also being loyal, I don't want to say in servitude, but about being available for service, being a faithful servant, not a slave, but a faithful servant. It's a person who's bent over and has their head bowed in humility, in appropriate humility, not humiliation, but humbleness. It also is the first letter of the word Nes, which means miracle. And it also corresponds to the number 50, which in Hebrew corresponds to the Jubilee year, the year when we free all the slaves. So how wonderful is that it shows up here in our final position of this reading about justice. We've got this new beginning with a certain amount of humility, of the bent head, that our challenge is to find where we exist on that continuum between sovereignty and slavery, to decide what we can do, what power we have in order to create sovereignty for all and release slavery without becoming the person who's the oppressor. And that brings us to a place of humility and Jubilee, where we free all the slaves. And that Jubilee year, when we celebrate the freedom of all, where everything is given rest and renewal, including the land. The land is returned to its original owner, who is the divine. Because we can't really own land. Only the divine can own land. Nun is also the foundation of locomotion, which, well, frankly, in terms of MLK, reminds me of the Underground Railroad freedom train. So the locomotion toward freedom. And in my reading of the Hebrunes, as they correspond to the traditional tarot, it corresponds to the Hermit card. So finding that place of humility, being sitting in silence, and also showing people the way. In the traditional Hermit card, the hermit is holding out a lantern to show others the way. It's about being in solitude, but guiding others once you've found the way in solitude. So I love this in terms of justice. We have this new beginning. We need to let go of something that is ending determine the judgment that needs to come and find our binary foundation of sovereignty and slavery, which leads us to humility, to the Jubilee where we free all, and the Hermit where we show the way for others in terms of locomotion and that railroad toward freedom. So for those of you who chose this Justice card today, this has been your reading. I hope you have a beautiful weekend celebrating justice, and we'll see you next time. All right, for those of you who chose card number 3, which is the Justice card from the Golden Botticelli deck. You can see this is gilded. I love this card. It's so beautiful. And she's carrying the scales and a halberd here. La Justicia. And I see, interestingly, whereas in most tarot decks, the Justice card is the number 11 card, this one is the number 8 card with the VIII at the top. Interesting. All right, I'm going to set Justice off to the side here. And today we're going to take out 3 Hebrunes to read in terms of what justice are you seeking and what justice is seeking you right now in your life. I'm going to pull out 3, I'm going to line them up from top to bottom. And the number 1 coming out is the letter Tet. The second letter is the letter Kaf. And our final letter is the letter Dalet. Interesting. Okay. So the letter Tet is the letter that begins the word Tov. And it means good. It means something good is within here. Tet looks like a vessel. You can see that it's shaped like a little basket or a cup. It could be a clay pot. But some people say that it is a womb. And it holds goodness within it. It is the number 9, so it corresponds to the 9 months of gestation in the human body. And there's something good within it. The number 9 also corresponds to the number of blasts that happen with the shofar during the Rosh Hashanah services. There are 9 sets of 9 staccato blasts in the Truah, and the Tekiyah is held for 9 counts. So it's about this renewal, this horn blasting that's awakening people to a renewal and return. It's said at Rosh Hashanah each person has the ability to be reborn with good potential. But I think of it as a womb or some kind of gestation happening. So something that's happening for you right now in terms of justice is gestating. There's something that is, maybe you're waiting on justice here. We're waiting for something to be born, but we're believing that there's goodness within it. Even if it's challenging right now, maybe even if it's uncomfortable. Pregnancies frequently are uncomfortable, even if they're gestations of new ideas or projects or working toward justice. They can be very uncomfortable, but we have to trust that there's good within. And our challenge here is the letter Kaf. And Kaf is the letter that corresponds to a hand. So it's like the palm of a hand. It is holding out a hand to give or to receive. So it can be either or both. It's about sort of that balance of giving and receiving. You'll see that in the 6 of Pentacles, where somebody is holding a scales, not unlike on the Justice card, and doling out charity for those who are impoverished. And so that Kaf reminds me of that giving and receiving that happens. Kaf is a palm of a hand or the sole of a foot. So interestingly, The kaf can also have to be about oppression. So, because it's whatever you can do with your hand. It can be about, like I said, giving or receiving or pushing down on someone or putting your foot on someone's neck. So it can, with regards to justice, it can have to do with oppression. The challenge here is oppression. That we have this someone or something that is lording over others. There's a certain amount of power that is being put upon another person. Kaf is the first letter of the word koach, which means power, a power that rules over others. It could be for good or evil, but in this case, since it's in the challenging position, or the position of fear in our situation, I'm believing that it has to do with oppression or suppression of someone. It can have to do with a covering over, such as a kaperet, which is the cover over something, to cover something up. I think it could have to do with protection in that case, protection from the sun. It does correspond to the sun in the sky as well, which is the source of all things. The sun can also be oppressive. The sun can also burn if we are not protected appropriately. So it has correspondences and correlations towards like pain, ka'ev, sorrow, weeping, being disheartened, has to do with shame and smashing and beating down on someone. So because it's in this challenge position, I'm going to say that that's the flavor of the kaf we're dealing with here, that there's a problem with power. Maybe someone is oppressing you, or you've been oppressing another person, and it's time to take a real close look at that. It is the binary transformation of wealth and poverty. So like I was saying in the Six of Pentacles, where you have somebody giving or receiving, it corresponds directly to that balancing of the scales of giving what is appropriate to give and receiving what it is appropriate to receive. And where do you stand in terms of that? Where are you landing on that continuum between poverty and wealth? Are you giving so much of yourself that you've become impoverished? Or are you hoarding so much wealth that you've become spiritually impoverished and are impoverishing others? And that's the challenge here in this time. I think of Kaf as being connected to the patriarch Yitzhak, who is Isaac. He is the son of Abraham and Sarah, and he was bound hand and foot. And he was subdued as a sacrifice, and he had the knife held over his head until the angel stayed the hand of his father Abraham. So he found himself in a very terrifying situation, and the Kaf corresponds to all that story as well. So as we're challenged right now with power, again, where do we land on that power dynamic? Are we the ones who are in power, or are they the ones who is being oppressed right now? Are we the one who is lording over other people our power, or are we the one that is being oppressed? And that is our big challenge right now. And our outcome under these circumstances is the letter Dalet. And Dalet is a doorway. It's a doorway or a gateway to whatever is happening next. It's sort of this liminal space that we have to pass through to get to the other side. I don't know what the other side is for you, but there's some kind of entryway. There's some kind of gateway that you're coming upon in the near future. That whatever you've got going on here with this gestation time and this power dynamic situation, there's some kind of change going to happen where there's a gateway, a doorway through which you need to enter. And it could be about birthing whatever your project, your idea, or person is, that you've had this gestation time where you're holding a thing in the womb, and then the Dalet is that doorway, it's that birth canal through which we come out into the world. It also has to do with humility, in that Dal means poor or humble. So it relates to humility and humbleness. And it is the binary foundation of wisdom and foolishness. So again, where in that continuum do you land? Are you being wise or are you being foolish here as you walk through the doorway? Dalet is the number 4 in Gematria. Corresponds to all 4 directions, north, south, east, and west. The 4 seasons, winter, spring, summer, and fall. The 4 elements, air, fire, water, and earth. And it also has to do with the 4 letters of the name of the divine, the Yud He Vav He. So everything that is, a square, the doorway, the seasons, the directions, the elements, and the name of the divine, all play into Dalet and the doorway here. In my reading of the tarot cards as they correspond to the Hebrunes, I see Dalet as the death card. It is that gateway, that transition, that liminal space or portal through which we have to transition to get to the other side of whatever our situation is here. And that can be, it's not a literal death. It's a transformation, a transmutation, where a literal birth is a death. I mean, if when one is born, they're dying to their home as far as they know, that they've always known inside the womb. They have to enter into the world, which can feel like a death to them. So as we are dealing with our justice situation here, we've got something that's gestating, something that we're trusting is good within. And there's a certain amount of oppression happening either by us or to us. And we need to determine that we're giving appropriately and receiving appropriately, that we're not oppressing or causing pain or suffering to another. And if we are being oppressed, then it's time for us to trust in the good within and get out through that doorway, whatever that doorway looks like. That we have the responsibility and the imperative to cross over through the doorway into freedom and to bring others with us on that journey, that we can also provide for the liberation of others in our situation as we find our way through that gate. So for those of you who chose the Justice card from the Golden Botticelli deck, this has been your reading for today. I wish you justice in all things you do, and we will see you here next time.